Greetings, Embers, newbies, and the peekaboos. Welcome to Back to Ashes. I am your host, Phoenix. If this is your first time here and you begin to like what you are hearing, please hit that subscribe button and consider setting your notification bell to all. That way you'll be reminded of every time a video is uploaded. We would love to have you as part of the family. Also, if you would like to learn how to become a member or would like to tip me with a coffee, that information can also be found down below. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the elite members of Back to Ashes shown here on your screen. Thank you all so much for your continued support. You all know that you are the pillars that hold this channel up, and I cannot thank you enough. Without further ado, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from those ashes, we are bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of Vocal Melatonin entitled True Backwoods Creepy Stories. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first story, there will be an ad. And after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Disclaimer, this video is for educational and entertainment purposes. I've spent my life in Georgia and love hiking all over, but I must admit, North Carolina has the best mountains. For this reason, I frequently drive up there and hike and camp. This time, I went up with my family in an RV and stayed with them in Maggie Valley. The next day, however, I had them drop me off 10 miles away at the Cold Mountain Trailhead, and I planned to hike up, spend the night, and be back down in the morning. I was by no means inexperienced at hiking or camping, but I had never camped alone. On top of that, I didn't bring a pistol, something I won't go without now. On the way up, the trail was surprisingly strenuous, not necessarily steep. I've hiked some steep stuff out west, but more like a ton of ups and downs and feeling like it wouldn't end. Eventually, it began to get darker, and I realized I needed to stop and set up while I still had light. So, I stopped about half a mile short of the summit and figured I would continue in the morning. Nothing eventful happened. I set up camp in a really good spot, ate my food, and went into the tent. At this point, I realized I hadn't run into a single other person my entire way up. This wasn't eerie at the time, but soon it would be. I have trouble sleeping and usually lay awake for up to an hour, just trying to fall asleep. During this, I thought I heard someone lightly walking around the general area because of the rhythm of the steps. I brushed it off as my mind running wild, but I did pull my big old knife out of my bag and put it next to me in the sleeping bag. That morning, I woke up and ate oatmeal. As I ate, I looked over at my tent and noticed a strange bundle of dried twigs and berries tied with green cord propped up against my tent. Internally, I was pissing myself, but I packed my crap up and took off within 5 minutes. And no way I bothered go to the summit. I headed straight down. On the way down, I realized there was a pretty heavy fog, and I ended up on a side trail that eventually ended, and I was lost. I used a compass to eventually reorient myself and found the trail again. One of the biggest reliefs. I made it out with no other incident. However, come to find out, the same morning, a 27-year-old died on that same section of trail as me, and it's possible I would have run into him had I not gotten lost and rejoined the trail later. His family seems to have scrubbed the internet of several of the articles on him, but I'll see if I can find something. The scariest part was knowing that someone knew where I was and watched me, and I had no clue about them. I've been a long-time lurker of the Backwoods stories, and this is going to be my first story. I haven't been able to stop thinking about this incident and wanted to see if it resonates with anyone. Me, 28, My wife, 28, and dog, who was 3, recently went to Red River Gorge, a state park in southeastern Kentucky. We're no strangers to camping in the park, having been there at least 20 times over the past 8 years. We chose a spot I've been to 2 to 3 times before. It's worth noting that this site is outside of other dispersed camping areas and is essentially the only proper spot with car parking along a 2-mile stretch of road. There's a dilapidated barn about a mile up from where we drove in, and a cemetery about a third of a mile in the opposite direction. Otherwise, it's a rarely traveled road, and we saw no one all day. Just an occasional car, maybe 1 or 2 an hour. The spot is at the base of a 30-foot incline that a 4x4 could handle. Our SUV was parked horizontally at the top, blocking other vehicles from descending. From there, it's about 30 yards into a campground, with another slope leading to the river's edge and swimming hole. The day went great. We spent time near the beach, letting our dog swim, then did typical camping activities like hiking, foraging, chopping wood, throwing the hatchet, and enjoying a few beers. Once sunlight began to fade, around 6:30, we started the fire and began cooking dinner. As darkness fell, the last light disappeared. We heard the usual sounds: squirrels rustling, things falling into the leaves, which spooked my wife a bit, but we didn't think much of it. Then, at about 9 p.m., sitting around the healthy fire and listening to music, we heard heavy shuffling in the leaves. Definitely something large or heavy. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the road, about halfway between us and our car. I stopped the music, and after about 10 seconds of dead silence, we heard the shuffling again. Before I could call out, we heard this strange and unnatural noise, something like a throttling, ascending pitch mixed with a shriek. Neither of us can verbally describe it, and I can confidently say I've never heard anything like it before. It was about 20 to 25 feet away, just outside the reach of my headlamp. Our dog went insane, hair standing on end, barking incessantly into the darkness. He was on a long lead, or I'm sure he would have taken into the darkness. My wife and I were frozen. I was holding my hatchet and trying to catch any movement or sound to track. After about 2 to 3 minutes of that, with no further noises, I calmed the dog, and we grabbed some essentials and hurried to the car. Our adrenaline was pumping as we discussed coyotes, foxes, or other animals as the possible culprits. I didn't want to mention the possibility of people, as that would have heightened the paranoia. We eventually passed out after about an hour, but I spent the rest of the night in and out of shallow sleep, feeling very uncomfortable both mentally and physically. I've always struggled to sleep anyway, except fully horizontal. At around 3 a.m., right next to my head, I heard a singular knock on my window, like someone tapped the glass with one knuckle. My wife didn't wake up, and I scanned the outside of the car, but didn't see or hear anything. I struggled to doze off again, and my heartbeat was rapid. When we finally got the first light at around 7 a.m., we cooked breakfast, packed up our campsite, and got the hell out of Dodge. No prints or anything out of the sorts with our remaining belongings either. What's strange to me is that after hearing the noise, we heard no additional heavy shuffling from the source. With our dog barking so aggressively, we should have heard whatever it was moving away. We've looked up various animal noises native to the gorge, and nothing even remotely resembles what we heard. The knock on the window was also isolated. There were no other noises or visible happenings outside the car immediately following. Lastly, I had a thought the day after we left. I remember whistling for our dog after dark, since we had some scraps to give him near the fire. Immediately I thought, shit, I shouldn't have whistled. But up until this trip, I've never been a believer of the superstitions. I just thought to respect the folklore I've heard. In hindsight, we are now convinced I may have invited a Wendigo or Skinwalker to our camp. I won't take these superstitions lightly again, and I'm sure this occurrence will affect at least my next few overnights in those woods. I'm going to butt in here. That was the end of the story. I am from Kentucky, and I do visit Red River Gorge. This happening that this couple had has been reported numerous amount of times. If you are ever in Kentucky and you decide to camp at the Red River Gorge, you will experience the same things. Mysterious shuffling and noises you can't explain. It literally sounds just like the story. Anyway, moving on. I want to share a truly bizarre, terrifying, and unexplainable experience I had growing up. To make note, my childhood home was a hotbed for paranormal activity. I could honestly write a book with the amount of stories I have, but this one was different from all the rest. So, to start off, we lived on a small stretch of secluded highway in a wooded area. Our home was nestled on a plot of land that was a few acres, and the area surrounding us was federally protected land of the wildlife refuge. Which means unless our house is grandfathered in, then no one can purchase land or build in this area, so we had no neighbors. Our house was a 300-year-old colonial house and held a lot of history. There was knowledge of Native Americans once residing there, and a lot of war stories with the Civil and Revolutionary War happening on that land. There was definitely a heavy negative energy in that house and property. You always felt like you were being watched from every single angle of the woods, and so many people who visited would become uneasy immediately and state their discomfort and needing to leave. My family and I have countless stories we experienced individually or with one another. This particular experience was shared between myself and two brothers. So, like many nights after dinner, my dad would tell me or one of my brothers to go out back and feed the dog. This was a scary task because it would be pitch black and our dog would be near the tree line of the woods, which for some reason, that section of the woods would give all of us an uneasy feeling anytime we go near it. And it didn't matter the time of day. It always was creepy. But being at night was definitely terrifying. So no matter which one of us was told to go out and feed the dog, we would never leave a man behind and would always go out in a trio because we knew better than that, because we wouldn't want to be left to go alone when it came our turn. So, on this particular night, I was probably around 11 years old, my brothers being 10 and the other 7. So, we would always do the same thing, so whoever was told by Dad to feed the dog, they were the one who had to carry the bowl out, and the other 2 would huddle close with the person with the bowl in the middle. We would walk extremely slow, all of us looking different directions, surveying the property, but keeping the conversations very lighthearted and being silly to keep from getting scared before completing the task. So, once we reached our dog, this is where the person holding the bowl would get screwed, because right before you had the chance to put it down, the other 2 siblings would scream something scary like, "Jeepers Creepers," or "The Jersey Devil," while hauling ass back to the house. So you would be left standing all alone before getting the chance to run with your siblings. So on this night, my brother was the one who had to hold the bowl, and as we walked out to head towards the backyard, something felt off. like the air felt static and charged, like how it feels before a lightning storm. And we could hear our dog barking like crazy, which was unusual. And as we got into sight of our dog, we see him standing on his hind legs with the leash pulled completely tight because whatever he was barking at, he was trying with all he had to break out of that collar and go after it. That's when we heard loud branches snapping and looked towards the direction our dog was barking in. We then see this big black stick figure that was as tall as the trees. It was walking over this huge brush pile we had, which was why we were hearing branches breaking. The way it walked was almost mechanical in a way, and its presence felt very ominous and gave us a very dreadful feeling. At first, it seemed like it didn't notice us and was just walking by, but then it turned towards us, and that's when we booked it towards the house. My brother throwing the bowl of food in the air and feeling like our legs were jello. We all saw the same thing, and it scared us so badly, and unlike many stories you hear, my parents actually believe us. Anyway, fast forward years and years later, and I was having a conversation with my coworker, and we would talk about paranormal topics quite a bit, so during this conversation, she asked me if I've heard of Native American stick people. And as soon as she said it, I knew what she was referring to. She then tells me about these giant stick figures out in the wood that Native Americans have seen and are supposedly a totem of evil spirits. And if you encounter one and it goes after you, it then can possess you and cause you to do harm. I was so freaked out because up until then, I had never heard of such a thing. But knowing the Native American history of that land, it makes me believe that they are related. I wasn't sure about sharing my story because it still gives me shivers every time I remember what happened. This happened in the Amazonas, in the border between Brazil and Peru. The jungle, it's an amazing place to live. Everyone knew each other, and I had a big group of friends of different ages. The only horrible part of the Amazon is the existence of terrorist groups that tried to control the region. I was 7 when this happened. Every kid in the village knew we had freedom to go anywhere, as long as it's not close to the terrorists, and that we could never leave the village at night. My parents taught me since I was very little to hide in case something happens, and to run if I see things will get dangerous. I remember all adults of the village were celebrating something. I think it was an Amazonian party like Halloween. I remember my mother painting her face in a tribal way. And all the children went together to a house to stay safe and have fun. The eldest girl was in charge. She was 17, and as soon as our parents left, she ignored us and left with her friends. Our closest group consisted of 6 children. I was one of the youngest one, and we all listened to the most adventurous one, Leon, who was 14. Whatever Leon said, we followed, because he was fun, always making challenges, and he knew how to take care of us. Yes, despite him being reckless, he was our friend. We loved him, and knew he would never abandon us if something happened. After playing soccer and eating, the 6 of us became bored. Carla, one of the 6, had the idea to dress up like our parents did, the tribal makeup and the dresses. We agreed, and soon we were all dressed up like the kids who lived in the village of the deepest regions of the Amazon. I remembered us playing around until Leon said to, and I quote, "Let's explore the Amazon and find a hidden treasure." We all cheered and agreed to leave. It was easy to escape, since the girl who was supposed to take care of us left us. Leon managed to find a lantern and a boat big enough for us six, and we decided to sail. It was around midnight, but we didn't care. Just imagine 6 kids dressed up on a boat, splashing water everywhere and trying to find an imaginary treasure. No phones, no adults, just the jungle and us. It was life at its purest. Everything seemed to be perfect until we hear people calling, "Who's there?" And we saw a lighted boat approaching. Quickly, Leon dropped the lantern and instructed us to lay down on the boat's floor and stay very still. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I remember clearly how we were all with our bellies to the floor, grabbing our hands and not even daring to breathe. But it was too late. "Stop hiding, I see you," a voice said as the guy illuminated our boat. We stood up and I saw 4 men with guns, and I'm not talking about small pistols here, pointing at us. They laughed and said, "They're a bunch of children." Leon put himself in front and said that we were on a hurry because our parents were expecting us home. The biggest guy, who had a red bandana, laughed again and said, "Little kids should not be here alone at night. You could disappear here in the jungle and no one will ever find you." At this point, I was super scared and Carla started crying. "You can go. You're just tribe hua hua," which means baby in Quechua. And they left. I remember all of us hugging each other, crying and sailing as fast as we could. Once we got home, we entered the house and closed all doors and windows. We all slept together on the floor, but before we all agreed not to tell this to anyone in the village, not the elders or our parents. Even now, no one knows what happened that night. Years later, I understood why they let us go. They thought we were kids from the local tribe. We had no value to them. If they had known where we dressed up and were from another village, I probably wouldn't be typing this story right now. This story takes place in November of 2022. At the time, I drew a special elk tag in the Beaverhead mountain range of central and east Idaho. I had hunted in this area many times before over the years, and I know the area like the back of my hand. It became a place of comfort and good memories. It still is. But I haven't looked at it the same way since the story I'm about to tell. I planned a week-long trip for the first week in November and took one of my best friends with me. We spent the first 4 days hiking up and down various ridges, chasing elk and having a blast. The nights were spent storytelling and eating soup by the stove. Mind you, it was November in Idaho, so it was very cold. It was the 4th night of the trip. It had snowed during the day, and a fresh layer of snow lay on the ground. The sky had since cleared up, and a very cold but still and quiet air had settled in. My friend and I had gotten into a deep discussion about the Bible, spirits, cryptids, skinwalkers, etc. I should note that my friend had at the time been experiencing a decline in his mental health, but it was not uncommon for him to sometimes behave erratically. This will be relevant later in the story. During this conversation, I felt an intense fear kind of settle upon me. It almost felt like the air had become tense. I had the urge to change the discussion into something else, but that's when it happened. Within 20 or 30 yards of the tent, what I thought at first was a coyote yipping and barking very, very loudly. I looked at my friend, who became excited and told me to grab my gun so we could go look for this thing. It was strange though, and something didn't feel right. The animal, whatever it was, didn't exactly sound like a coyote. It almost shrieked, as opposed to yipping the way coyotes do, and it would occasionally bark and at times almost scream. I'm also an experienced outdoorsman, and any other hunter knows a coyote would not approach a tent in the middle of nowhere and draw attention to itself. It would continue to vocalize for about 3 to 5 minutes at a time, circling the tent from a distance. I reluctantly grabbed my rifle and my spotlight, very bright, intense flashlight, mind you, and started looking for this thing. As I stepped about 10 yards away from the tent, I heard it again directly in front of me, shrieking, barking, etc. I shined my light directly at it. I could see probably 150 to 200 yards in front of me, yet nothing was there. No eyes shining in the light, no outline of an animal or person. Nothing. After repeating this scenario 3 or 4 times, we gave up and went back in the tent to warm up. But the sound wouldn't stop. At one point, when it went silent, my friend poked his head out of the tent and yelled, "Hey, shut up!" He was immediately answered with a scream from the animal. At times, it sounded like it came from above the tent in the tree we were camped under. I tried playing it off as a coyote or maybe a hunting dog that got lost, but I could not convince myself it was either of those, and we ignored it for the rest of the time. It slowly started going further and further away from the tent, until it finally stopped about an hour or so later. The next morning, I looked around the area for tracks, yet to my surprise, I found nothing but our own. We didn't talk about it for the rest of the trip, and a few days later, we went home. Now, I don't know if this is all related, but about 3 months after this, my friend had a complete mental breakdown and has since never been on a hunting trip. Some in his family, a deeply religious family, questioned whether he was a victim of some spiritual attack or something of that nature. I didn't correlate the two at the time, but in hindsight, I have so many questions about that night. Is it a coincidence whatever that animal was appeared during that particular conversation? Could it have actually been a coyote or wolf? Why couldn't I see any eyes gleaming with a flashlight? Did this incident have something to do with my friend's mental decline? My friend would sometimes tell me and others about strange things he saw or heard. Was this related? If anyone has anything to point out, I'm all ears. I don't remember if I've shared my story, but people on TikTok liked my story, so I thought you would too. I'm located in Michigan, in the United States. Some background on me. It's relevant. Since I was little, I've been able to see things and feel the paranormal, known more about Fae than I should, like drawing the Leah Fail, old Fae portal from their world to ours, near perfectly with crayons when I was like 3 years old and wasn't even told the word Fae or fairy. I bought my first horse, a weanling colt, when I was 16. I named him Lugos, different spelling of the Celtic sun god Lugo, who fought in a Fae war. It was the only name he answered to when I called it, as I was trying to name him when he was 2 months old. I've been with horses for over 10 years by then, so know things pretty well. A few months after I got him home to the barn I worked at, he'd just come from the hospital, and it was a hot July. He and his 2 older buddies were inside during the heat of the day and only out during the dawn and dusk. The day went normal. I got there in the morning, fed, let out, and cleaned stalls, then brought in just before noon. and went home for a swim and a nap. Came back before sunset, so 7 p.m.ish. I pulled them out, cleaned again, and made their dinner. I hugged my horse goodnight when he then turned his head to the back leg. I thought there was an itch he couldn't reach, so I reached down and my hand was covered in blood. I pulled my phone flashlight out and saw his back legs were all cut up and he had a coronet laceration. I called my mom and she came over to help me clean and bandage the wound. I looked all over the pasture that night with a flashlight to see if there was any sign of how he had gotten hurt. There was nothing. We knew the vet wouldn't be able to help that late, so the next morning I called. He couldn't do anything because of where the wound was and just told me how to treat it. All was fine and went on like normal, except when I brought the manure out to the compost. I always take the same route. This time there was clean, squeaky clean intestines from a small animal laying there in front of me, like someone washed them and put them there for me to find. I asked the barn owner and neighbors. No one knew anything about it. I felt uneasy. It felt like an apology, but I know enough to bury it without a thank you. I then remembered feeling watched these past few days at the barn. I always brushed it off because it wasn't scary and didn't feel like I was going to be hurt. But now that this happened, I was rethinking the wounds on my horse, and I looked back towards the woods. The pasture is between a road and a forest, cornfield on the other side of the road, and giant power lines on the other side of the forest. The pasture nestled halfway into the forest. The wounds on my horse looked like something grabbed his back legs. The cuts and scratches were as wide as my fingers, and the lacerations were deep and wide. Starting from his hoof all the way up, perfectly crescent shaped, like a sharp blade or claw did it. He also had a scrape on the opposite side of the coronet wound, hip bone up near his back. I don't know if it's connected, as that is a common place for a horse to bite when playing, but can also happen from falling over, though he wasn't dirty when he came in, so I don't think he fell. I never found anything that had blood or a sharp edge in the pasture, but the feeling it was something that did it never left. So we called some friends over, told them nothing, and asked what they feel walking through the pasture. One was an older man named Jim. He said he felt uneasy, like there was something stalking the woods and trying to get in. The next two to come over were a younger couple called Moon and Adam. They were told nothing, yet said the same thing. Exactly the same thing. Plus, Moon said she felt like there was a lot of activity here, possibly a portal between worlds. I then got my old iron horseshoe and set it on my horse's stall wall on the outside. It was barely put there, wiggled between the wood. A few days later, when my horse only was outside when I was there, a massive rainstorm hit. Wind, rain, and lightning. That night I was feeding. They came inside just after it, out of nowhere. My mom was helping me get them in and leave ASAP with the power cut. The barn shook and I glanced outside in the rain to see the barn owner's husband, who lives in the property's car, almost flip from the wind. He made it inside and told us we can't under any circumstances drive until the storm passes and we are welcome in the basement. Us, being us, we say, thank you, but we'll stay in the barn to watch if we need to release the horses. My mom is a witch and started a spell to protect the barn. The wind got worse. I had to hold the door closed as it tried to open. Horses scared and restless, but safe in their stalls. Not even 30 minutes later, the storm stopped. Storm lasted a few hours, so When we looked out there was fallen trees on the fencing, T-posts beat and extremely muddy. We looked out the other way, power still off, to see more fallen trees and broken fencing everywhere, along with 2 fire trucks with sirens on racing past us, followed by a storm chaser car. Glancing at each other, we check the horses are good and run after them 2 to 3 houses down to find a massive tree had fallen over the road. No one was hurt, but this being the main road into town, they had to clear it ASAP. We asked the storm chaser why he's there. He said there was a tornado. No sirens went off. It came out of nowhere. He said it was heading straight for the horses' pasture and barn, but dodged us last minute and went into the yard of a couple houses down, taking a healthy tree out by its roots. The next day, some friends, including Moon and Adam, came over to help fix the pasture up. They immediately noticed that thing was gone. No more feelings of being watched or hunted. We think it left when the power went out, as it was stuck between the electric fence and power lines. He healed without lasting damage, just scars on his legs and a nasty scar down his hoof. My thoughts on what it was. A fae got trapped and tried to take my horse with them or ride him out so they could leave, like the fairy noctales. Hurt him and was scary. Why I think fae is from the apology. Intestine is the best part of a kill, and that I felt safe. Lugos was not shook up like he was attacked. I never have felt uneasy or unsafe. If they are around and could be, and I felt like I almost knew it. I had other sightings at that barn that had nothing to do with the horses, such as a silver man and a bunch of shadows. Oh, and the horseshoe that was barely put there. Took me 20 minutes to get it off the stall when we moved. It was stuck and I have no idea because when I put it there, it was just lightly wiggled between the boards. That fall we moved. I took my horse and leased one of the older buddies for him. I moved with my parents to a small farm in the countryside, a small land with a barn and fields on all sides and forests past that. The house has ghosts, a 120-year-old house. But for the first few years, nothing happened with the horses, and anything creepy, that is, until I was at the back of the pasture at night, putting hay out a few weeks before October 31st, 2023. I was far from the house and barn when I froze in place. Something was on the other side of those pine trees. There's a line of pine trees behind the pasture, fencing, and fields. This thing, unlike the last, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I felt uneasy. When I looked up, I saw something darting behind the trees. It was breaking its height to taller than me. I'm 5'5", by the way. It was shadowy with yellow eyes and an animalistic movement, yet human at the same time. Its arms touched the ground as it went back and forth, weaving behind the pines. The back legs bent under it. The neck was thick, and the head was always pointed at me. So I didn't see the side profile. I almost could see fur, but it moved so fast. That same night, the e-collar remote from my neck went missing. From my neck. I looked around for a few minutes and found it sitting a few feet from the fence line that the thing patrols. A few days later, I had to yell at my dog for going into the field because of the house, same one that the thing is next to. My horses refused to go over there at night, and I kept my dog out of there after that. On the night of the 31st, we had Moon and Adam over for pumpkin smashing and a bonfire. I asked them to come for a walk with me in the pasture. Once we got into the pasture, my horse Lugos, who is now 3 years old, came up for huggies and followed up along. He never tries to stop people from walking in front of him. I taught him that's a no-no, as he is massive. As we near the place the creature stalks, he tried to push Moon back the way he came, tried to stop her and Adam from continuing. But we ignored him and walked on while he stood there watching us. That's when Adam stopped and pointed at the tree saying, "What was that?" He was shook, said something darted between the trees and described what I've been seeing. They got the heebie-jeebies and noped out back to the bonfire at the other end of the property. A couple of days later at work, they pulled horseshoes. Iron horseshoes from my favorite home there. I got to keep them and put them at each corner of the property. The thing didn't come back. My thoughts on what it was? No idea. Didn't feel like I knew anything about it, and I didn't recognize it. At this property, I've seen gnomes in the field, ghosts in the house, and fae traps, aka the leaves and corn waving me over when there is a wind. One night I was inside the barn with my horses, sitting in Lagoo's stall just chilling, when I heard footsteps on the roof. I froze, looked at my horse, and saw he heard them too. His head was up and ears forward listening, same as my other horse. I heard it walk from the front of the barn over my horse's stall, and then stop directly over the stall I was sitting in with my horse. I was still sat on the ground. I looked at the window that the stall has, half expecting to see someone poke their head down from the roof, but nothing came. We sat there for a good 30 minutes in silence, just listening to the footsteps walk around the roof. This thing was human-sized and had 2 feet, if it wasn't the middle of the night, and everything else was asleep. I'd have thought someone popped up there, but we didn't have a ladder and any reason to be up there, and more importantly, after midnight. It finally went away, and I waited a bit before scrambling out the barn, locking all the doors and windows. Horses staying inside that night because I was not going to pull them outside with whatever that was. My thoughts on what it was? Again, no clue. The last story I'll add is a good one from the year 2024. My contacts broke and I had no glasses, so I could barely see, but my 2 horses broke out and ran down the road. I chased them, forgetting my phone, and only had a halter and a bucket of grain. The dirt road was luckily empty, and they weren't over a mile down it, running through yards and fields until I couldn't see them, but a yellow and brown blob. My family was grabbing a car key as I went on foot. I started crying, fearing I'd never catch them or they'd be hit and killed. I spoke out loud, asking anyone who would listen, "Please let them come home." Just after I said that, they turned around and the colored blurs got bigger. I saw someone with black hair and a long red shirt walking my brown horse named Calavera. He's 16 feet and 1 hand high, but they were tiny compared to him. Their head just past my chest. I'd say 4 feet to 5 feet. I thought it was the owner or kid of the owner of the horse that they were just at. I shouted, "Thank you, I'm so sorry they got out." But as I got closer, this person was gone. I know I saw someone. It was clearly a person. I know what you're thinking, that I didn't see anyone, but a trick of the light because I didn't have any glasses. I would have agreed, but I could tell you how long their hair was, haircut, clothes, and build, and how they were walking with my horse leading him home. They ran past me and I caught Calavera in a neighbor's yard, walked him home, and Lugos followed. They were unharmed. I still don't know who it was, but I'm very grateful they brought them home. My thoughts on what it was. Either a spirit or a god came when I called for help. I don't know who. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. This happened nearly 6 years ago, when my partner and I first got together. We decided to go camping by the beach in Coromandel. It's very remote, nothing for ages down the road. We were sitting on the rocky beach, and he starts telling me about a conversation he had with his mate. His mate was chatting about seeing some weird lights in the sky, and partway into their conversation, they see both the lights in the sky above them. Not even 5 minutes later, it started. I know this sounds far-fetched, but we have spent 6 years trying to figure it out. We are both in scientific careers. We are evidence-based people. If we had not experienced it at the same time, we would not have believed it. 2 strikes of lightning, no thunder. Then, lights in the sky, slowly aiming towards us. What looked like a Coast Guard searchlight started scanning across the forest around us, then stopped directly on us. This is a small bay. There are no nearby boats before this started. As the light turned off, we saw there was no boat, no lighthouse, nothing that could have created it. It lit up the entire mountainside. It definitely wasn't a torch. Then, peculiar strings of lights weaving around the trees. Here's the thing. I saw them as an off-white color. My man-thing saw multicolor. He's completely colorblind. They were far too fluid to be drones. The trees were very close together. Then, these weird beams that looked like flashlights, but didn't quite look right, started signaling all around us in the sky, waving over to us, then back to the sky. We were surrounded by dead branches, etc. Yet, we heard no footsteps. Each time we turned off the car lights, they turned on that millisecond. Too quick for a normal reaction time. They became closer and closer every time we turned the car lights off and on, silently, until my partner quickly told me to get the car right now. We heard laughter right beside him, but still no footsteps and no visible people. As we drove out, we saw a massive rubbish bag, about 2 meters long, stuffed full. We checked the site before putting our tent up, and it was definitely not there. I work in the bush out in the Wops. I know how to safely establish a tent site. We heard no plastic rustling either. That would explain it being moved there. We were sober, straight, and of course, mentally healthy. To this day, we have no idea what it was. I scoured the internet, local libraries, etc., and found nothing. So I live in the southeastern corner of South Dakota. There isn't a lot of wooded area down here, but there is some. My boyfriend and I have been spending a lot of time exploring the few wooded areas that we have. Yesterday afternoon, we went to this one area. We would not have expected anything to happen because it was still decently close to the town of Brandon. If anything, our concern would have been people. This park or wooded area has lots of things to explore for the area, and we brought one of his friends with us. We are more intense with our hikes than he is, so he let us leave him behind and he went off exploring the beaten trail, and we did our own thing. By the time we were getting back to the area, we left him. The sun was starting to set and he wasn't there, so we called him up and he said he was heading back to the car. It's important to note that during this time, We were making these screams back and forth at each other, trying to see if we could hear each other be on the phone. The boyfriend and I had one more trail we wanted to explore, so we headed down that trail. And then, eventually, it was actually getting dark, so we made our way to the trail and then took us back to the car. We were walking through the woods and joking about how the friend was probably going to try and scare us or some shit. We saw a deer and didn't see anything of it, but it actually startled myself originally. Finally, we made it to this area that is where the woods start to turn to prairie, and we heard the scream. And a really fast deer jumped through the trees that was split into two branches. I don't know a good way to explain the tree layout. We, being logical, started calling out to his friend again hey, you got us, not funny. But it clearly wasn't our friend. We're a little on edge after that, but just picking up our pace, getting to the car. Him and I took turns kind of looking back behind us, and I saw what looked like an obese man just kind of standing on the trail behind us. But it had more of a ghost-like presence to it than an actual man. Boyfriend looked back at some point and said, "Hey, I don't want to scare you, but it almost looks like there is a person back there or something." My face just dropped and I said word for word, "You saw it too?" And then we just kind of looked at each other and ran. We ended up taking the wrong path, so we had to run a lot longer. We eventually made it back to the car. His first friend was there, and he swears on his life he wasn't fucking with us. Either way, no way this dude could have ran that fast, or looked like what we saw behind us. When we got home, we started trying to look stuff up. We think it could have been a skinwalker, but also, this is South Dakota. We're on Lakota Sioux land, not Navajo land. Either way, it was a major and very creepy experience to go through. And that, dear Embers, brings a close to these true Backwoods creepy stories. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge the other members of Back to Ashes. Thank you all so much. As I always say, I just can't put it into words. Thank you all for being so supportive and hanging in there. To anyone new, to the Peekaboos or whomever, thank you all for stopping by, and I appreciate your support. For without all of you, I would not have a voice and there would not be a Back to Ashes. I am humbly grateful. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland treats you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed these selections. Until next time, please take care out there and stay vigilant. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourself a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good night. Peace, love, and light to you all.